Solid-state drives, SSD, are better than old-fashioned hard disk drives, HDDs, in many ways, and plummeting SSD prices have led to many PC builders forgetting about HDDs completely. But despite SSDs being a better option in most cases, there are still times you should consider the humble HDD. Considering an HDD instead could save you money and get you a bit of extra space. So if your circumstances permit it, it's a smart option. Those circumstances vary a bit, but there are definitely still situations where an HDD does a very adequate job and an SSD is a bit too much. What's the difference? An SSD uses integrated circuit assemblies to store data. This data is usually stored as flash data, so little blocks of information are written and erased electronically as needed and stored on silicon. Because of their construction, SSDs have no moving parts and tend to be lighter, faster, and more durable than many alternatives. There are a few different types of SSD, SATA, and CMOS. SATA SSDs tend to be cheaper and connect in a similar way to a traditional hard drive. CMOS SSDs usually go into a slot on the device's motherboard, can be significantly faster, tend to be smaller, and are usually more expensive than SATA drives. An HDD is one of those alternatives. The technology is a lot older, and data is written and rewritten on a spinning disk by a magnetic head. Hard disk drives are mechanical, and their moving parts have the potential to cause issues. There's also something called a head crash, where the arm responsible for reading and writing on the hard disk strikes it. This is usually caused by some sort of external force or shock that occurs while the drive is in use, like if someone drops the drive while it's reading or writing. To complicate things further, there are a few kinds of HDD, and they tend to be categorized by speed. This relates to how fast the disk can spin, and as a result, how fast the PC can read or write on it. The higher the speed, the better the drive's performance. You'll find most modern HDDs are stated at 7,200 RPM or 5,400 RPM. For the purposes of this article, we're assuming you're looking at a 7,200 RPM HDD, which performs significantly better than the 5,400 RPM version. It's potentially more recoverable. SSDs have a reputation for being more reliable, and generally lasting longer, than HDDs, but a recent study by cloud storage company Backblaze casts some doubt on that. Although the study noted that the data it contained wasn't conclusive, it did suggest the reliability gap between HDDs and SSDs was not as wide as we thought. Backblaze monitors and logs thousands of drive failures every year and found that the percentage of SSDs and the percentage of HDDs dying on their owners was roughly the same. Even if the study is wrong and an HDD may be more prone to damage than an SSD, you also have a greater chance of getting data back from an HDD should the worst happen. It is possible to recover data from an SSD, but it's a lot more complex and a lot less likely to happen than it is with an HDD. Part of this involves how the drives themselves fail. An HDD is likely to show some symptoms when it is on the way out, which gives you a chance to back up important files. SSDs also come with something called a trim command, which totally erases data once it gets told to delete it. Data is harder to locate on an SSD, due to how SSDs tend to write and move pieces of information around. In the case of absolutely catastrophic damage, an HDD has still burned information onto a disk, and some of that could survive. An SSD isn't structured like that. Even when an HDD breaks and doesn't seem recoverable, a clean room can still dismantle it and get to the physical disk that contains your data. That isn't something you can really do with an SSD.